Hello, everyone. Thank you, Carolina, for facilitating the coordination, and thank you, Mateo, for arranging the online streaming. We are Beatriz, Leticia, Alberto, and myself, Blanca, and today and tomorrow we will be doing the closing online live event of the program, Gear with Petals, where we will engage with and expand on the ideas and questions discussed throughout the program, such as language and the politics of invisibility, faith, dreams, and cyclical time, amongst others. Through talks, poetry readings, and performance with Christine Brache, Cheroset, Shiv Kotecha, Nisha Ramayya, and Beckett Warzer. For today's session, Shiv Kotecha will give a talk and read until 8 p.m. Central European Summer Time, followed by poetry readings by Nisha Ramayya and Christine Brache. And tomorrow we will also start at 7 with Cheset's talk until 8, followed by Beckett Warzer's performance and writing exercise. Carolina and the four of us will be checking the chat and will read any comments or address any questions in the end. And for now, we'll just briefly introduce today's participants. Shiv Kotecha writes poetry, fiction, and criticism. He is the author of 2 books, The Switch, published by Wonder, Next Week, published by Make Now Books, and a contributing editor for Freeze magazine. He lives and works in New York. Nisha Ramayya grew up in Glasgow and is currently based in London. Her collection, States of the Body Produced by Love, from 2019, is published by Ignota Books. Christine Brache is an artist, filmmaker, and poet. She received her MFA in Fine Art Media from the Slade School of Fine Art, London. She often takes her personal and family history as a starting point to explore cultural erasure, shared histories, and trauma, and the inevitable power dynamics that accompany these themes. Brache predominantly works in installation, sculpture, text, and film. Solo exhibitions include those held at Firman Gallery, New York and Puerto Rico, Locust Projects, Miami, and Anat Edgi, Los Angeles. Her work has been featured in festivals and group exhibitions at Team Gallery, New York, the Museum of Contemporary Art, Miami, Bow Arts, London, and Slam Dance Park City, among others. Her work has been critically reviewed in places such as the Los Angeles Review of Books, the New York Times, and the New Yorker. So whenever you feel like Shiv, you can start and we will turn off our cameras.
Thank you very much. I'm running like a couple different technologies here, so something might fail, including my mouth. But I just want to thank anyone who is watching for being here. And I wanted to thank the hosts of the program for their invitation to be part of Gear with Petals programming this year. Beatriz, Blanca, Alberto, Leticia, Marco, I believe, who was the tech manager, and Christine, as well as the, and also for prompting me to think about writing a poem that I wrote a couple years ago called The Unlovable, especially as it might relate to or speak in confluence with the practices of some of the other participating artists in this 2-day program, as well as the people that you guys have been reading and looking at over the past couple months. I'm particularly excited to read alongside Nisha and Christine and to participate with Shay and Beckett in this 2-day thing overall. I'm gonna share my screen. So test number 1. Okay. I don't know if you guys can see me, but that's okay. Second. So The Unlovable is a long poem, and I guess I'll just introduce it first and then talk through a couple different things. This is a sort of informal revisitation of it, but I'm excited for the opportunity to have gotten to do this because it's revisiting this poem has sort of become simultaneous to a lot of the different sort of things I've been reading and thinking about within the last couple months. And I'll talk more about that later, but it's been a sort of really generous thinking process at the very least. The Unlovable was probably the first full poem I wrote after moving to New York City in 2011, which is about 3 years after my writing life began, I guess in my mid-20s, when I moved from Buffalo, where I finished my master's and started my PhD program at NYU. However, I composed the poem between 2014 and 15. So that was like a 4-year lag where I was sort of making a lot of transitionary work. But I don't think that I was really working on anything that I considered complete until The Unlovable. So it does feel, looking back, as this kind of moment where I kind of figured something out. I'm not really sure what that was. But I completed my master's in Buffalo in between the years 2010, 11, was starting to consider myself a poet who was publishing. I was writing and sharing work with poets like Joey Uris-Algazin and Holly Melgard, who run the publishing collective Troll Thread and who published my first 2 books. And Holly is actually the designer of all of my books, including The Switch, which I will talk about in a little bit. But also poets like Divya Victor and Chris Sylvester, who were also a part of the Troll Thread collective. And they were all, including myself, looking to art and theory, to performance, and to Tumblr aesthetics, among other things, to think about the felicities of form between poetry and less isolated discourses. My work before The Unlovable, I would say, was really motivated by a lot of procedural concerns. I am extremely interested in description and in repetition and the effects of repetition over time. And I think that this plays into the work, into The Unlovable, but in a slightly sort of different way. Looking back, I'm able to see that there's something in my first few books that there's concerns in my first few books, which I am noticing actually appear within The Unlovable and continue to sort of inform my writing practice today, which are the sort of interactivity between the reader and the writer, or some sort of form of participation or boundary shattering as well. And I don't mean that as a sort of radical turn. I just mean it as a kind of a testing of a limit point between 2 or more bodies and the kind of communicability that can be engaged in poetry between them. And my early work was also kind of, I used a lot of transcription and I used a lot of found language, which I think with The Unlovable, I kind of departed from. My first book of poetry was for example, my first book of poetry was a coloring book where readers were invited to paint male celebrities from memory. And so each page of the book has a kind of command, paint Jonathan Taylor Thomas from memory, paint Barack Obama from memory. And my second book, Outfits, was a sort of collage project where I took 10 different narratives that engaged the plague, from Angels in America in regard to the AIDS crisis, but also like the Black Plague. I pulled words from the Decameron, from Defoe, and from several other sources, and basically inventoried all of the items that could be used as an item of clothing that one could use to protect oneself in a plague scenario. And each page just sort of collages these things into sort of absurdist outfits that are meant for self-protection, but that if you attempt to kind of consider it, it sort of falls apart as a sort of impossible combination. Looking back, one of the more clear through lines I see, wherein some of the thematics that are presented there continue to sort of inform my practice, are the vacuity of and the violence produced by mass-produced images and icons, the performance of courtly and spiritual forms of intimacy, and the ways in which incapacity, awkwardness, and fragmentation can fit into larger Anglophonic poetic practices, but also in thinking about the kind of the sort of conceptual turn within poetry that attempted to make work seem so totalizing and programmatic and complete. I think that the sort of the maximalism of Unlovable was attempting to sort of play with that bombastness at a particular moment, around 2011 or 2012. Here's the cover of the Switch. This is what the cover looks like, and this is what the sort of form of the Unlovable looks like. I'll talk about it more for those who haven't read it in just a minute. But before I do, to give you a kind of introduction to the book, it's a book that's in 3 parts. It's called The Switch. And I'm starting to think of it now as a kind of novel rather than as a book of 3 poems or 3 long sections. The Unlovable follows 2 poems. The first is an apologia in verse called I'm Sorry, Shiv, I'm Sorry, Diana, in which 2 characters, one named after me and one named after my current roommate in New York City, Diana Hamilton, also a poet, have a fight about what sex means to them. They argue about the legitimacy of their form of relation, which is just a queer friendship, as it might play out with or without sex. Ultimately, it's a poem that is about the erotics of speech or of sex talk, to be more specific, and of our ability to explore a spectrum of sexual proclivities by way of simple inversions. So in a matter of switching, in the poem, Diana several times becomes Shiv, Shiv becomes Diana, he also becomes his parents, and then he becomes his straight lover, and then becomes Shiv again. In the poem, what is true is that they're friends, but what remains unstable is that as in their life, their preferred sexuality, how they identify either as Shiv, Diana, neither, or both, and their probable gender, all those things remain sort of open questions in this sort of spectrum of the poem, as I imagine that they are in life, as if it's not me. If the first poem in the book is exercise in participatory relation, the second section of the Switch, called Obedience Residency Manual, is a 30-part suite of essayistic writing and fictional prose that's divided for one day. Each section is for a day of the month. And each part includes a potential writing or acting prompt. through which the sort of speaker is self-directing to keep himself from reaching out to a lover. So instead of reaching out to a lover, he goes to the cock. Instead of reaching out to a lover, he starts his dissertation. Instead of reaching out to a lover, he writes a letter to his friend Diana. Some of them stop at the prompt, and others become more long-form meditations or explorations of the imperative at hand. There's an essay on estrangement and the epistolary form, a story about re-speech in New York, and Hervé Guibert's last days on the island of Corfu. There's a story about properly lighting interracial porn, and the section Obedience Residency Manual ends with a suite of 5 stories called The Hypothesis of the Stolen Head, which is a riff on the title of a film, The Hypothesis of a Stolen Painting, by the Chilean director Raul Ruiz. The story is maybe narratively the most linear. It's maybe the most linear part of the novel, where I was attempting to produce fiction that had action and not just sort of maximalist, sort of cartoonish characters, but actually had some sort of things going on. The story is about 2 friends who named Jay and Andrew, who go to Greece on vacation. Some of the scenes that occur are they watch a YouTube video, they drink a lot, they try to find men on Grindr to sleep with. And on one hungover morning, the character Jay, who is an oblique reference to potentially the author, visits the cave of the apocalypse on the island of Patmos, and he goes into a sort of spell and accidentally steals the skull of Saint Thomas. While he's worried about what he's done, he is accosted by a Greek militia who mistake him for a migrant refugee, but their racist profiling of him is what protects his theft of the ancient artifact. That's the sort of story, in a certain sense, of the cover, which is which it shows St. Thomas as the doubter poking Jesus to see if he is actually a living being or not. The racial profiling in the story, for me, hides the fact that the racialized character stole a famous icon. It's a moment of unreality, or the one moment that's close to the weird thing that we might call life, that I hope that the rest of the story, or the rest of the book for that matter, could approach in its absurdity and its surrealism, in its mode of engaging what could be beyond the spectrum of the real. It's rather than treating this sort of moment of racial profiling as a sort of central moment, to me, the only way to properly engage it is to amplify everything but that moment, so that it can be thought about in relation to other things that seem as absurd as racism. The section ends with Andrew, who's Jay's friend, years later, who receives a call from the Greek travel bureau that his friend's skull had washed up onto the shore should he choose to claim it. As this sequence goes, so this is like the first 2 parts of the book, this would be right up till the point where the Unlovable begins. You would see like a sort of birth of Shiv, which happens on the first page of the book, and the death of Jay, and then, you know, several years after his body has decomposed into the ocean. I thought that putting the Unlovable at the sort of end as a sort of coda to the book could be a way of distancing it from it being tied to Lord Shiva, whose namesake I have, and tied to the kind of universe of the book instead. So Jay, who is Shiv of the first part of the book, who makes nothing, as he says, in the last poem becomes the sort of entity that remakes the world. And that is the sort of project of the Unlovable. Let me show you what this looks like. This is the first page of the Unlovable, which is a 30-page poem that's written in, that was initially written in prose, and that I broke up into 10-syllabic lines because I wanted it to look like a poem. And the difference between prose and poetry might be as simple as a line break sometimes. I was also thinking about having, I really wanted a form that was rigid enough to kind of explode each line. And so there is no sort of a proper enjambment here. If the line ends at the 10th syllable, the word itself breaks or splits and moves on to the next line. I had this quote by Renee Gladman that I didn't really work into this talk, but that I've been thinking about a lot, which is from a talk that she gave, actually, where she's talking about her writing life and her fascination with notions of origin and passage. But she says that for her, and I think this is true for me as well, that it's not in terms of ancestry. What she says about origins is, since I don't know where she says, I don't know the languages or the landscapes that preceded the incursion of English in what is now the United States into my lineage. And then she says, the violence of that erasure, all of the inheritances interrupted, is as foundational to my relationship to language and subjectivity as is grammar. I open my mouth in my own life, and I want to distort, rearrange, mispronounce the available vocabulary. This comes from a desire to resist assimilation, but it also arises out of a sense of exploration or adventure or a sense of puzzlement, as if something has happened to my occupation of the language where a kind of split occurs. While I didn't have this Renee Gladman text when I wrote this poem, along with the other kind of sources that I'm sharing today, I think it does sort of speak to some of the concerns I had with using this kind of baldly imperial form, which is like pentameter, and coupling it with this kind of really sort of fluid exploration of a Hindu god subjectivity. In its first iteration, the Unlovable was actually called Splitting. Excuse me. Here's where I have some technical trouble. As I mentioned, it was written in prose, and the first iteration was dedicated to my friend Joey Algazin, with whom I remember having a drunk conversation outside a bar in the East Village called Tile Bar. And I had told Joey about Lord Shiva, whose namesake I hold, who is the Hindu deity who is simultaneously known as the destroyer of evil and the dancer god. Here are a few representations of Lord Shiva as they are seen. These are a few pictures I've taken over the last couple days. My interest in Shiva, or in Hindu mythology, is sort of based on the fact that most of the icons and images are of queer, trans, non-binary figures like Lord Shiva, who's here seen as Shiv Shakti, who's like a sort of bifurcated male, female birthing individual. I also have a picture of myself dressed up as Shiv, which was what my family did when there were large-scale religious events. And I was very much for this, as I got to wrap snakes around my neck and stuff. But it was also this kind of strange performance, this sort of costuming that I kind of wanted to take with me into this poem, if that makes any sense. Joey pointed out that it could be fun to use the character of Lord Shiva as a sort of agent within a poem, which I thought was a great idea. It allowed me to try to write something that I could put into words as if for the first time. It was I was reading at the time Robert Gluck's essay collection, Communal Nude, in which he says that the form of pornography is always in search of structures or roles in order to overwhelm them, and that the effect of this is complete when the characters in the porno become animals themselves, abandoning life's starched colors. It was my attempt, Unlovable, in other words, is my attempt to take a pornographic look at Shiva's unpious mythos, his sort of sexualized body, his colored body. He's often, if not portrayed in sort of skin tones, is usually seen in the color just as a blue figure. I wrote the poem in the form of a monologue. I wrote it in the second person, and I wrote it in the future tense. It takes place right before or alongside the end of the world, which the speaker of the poem, Lord Shiva, identifies as the moment that he will appear before his listening subject. While writing, I think I had the idea, and this may have come sometime later into it, that in terms of the poem's tone, I wanted it to engage the space of intimacy. The speaker of the poem, in other words, we could assume is directly speaking to another entity who might be separable from the poem's reader. He's not speaking to the poem's ideal reader, as we sometimes come to think of it, or even one reader that can be identified. There's no particular you. But the speaker Lord Shiva is instead speaking to a kind of listener, a kind of passive non-reader or eavesdropper who remains like a constant throughout the duration of the poem's address. I wasn't necessarily thinking when I made this recording of the poem about ASMR, but I was asked twice to record parts of the Unlovable, once for a poetry mixtape and then another time for an installation in Sweden. And for both times, I thought the most appropriate way of reading this text, which is fairly, it engages in a lot of sort of violent language and a lot of sexual language. I hope to have it read as a lover might speak to another lover in the ear. So here's a small recording of that, of me reading.
This is mostly a story about you. I made you. That's right, I made you. I made every single part of you. Your fingernails, your hair, your sweat, the color red. The dick that fell out of your pussy for the first time. Yeah, that's right, I made that dick and I made it fall out. And I made all the little bumps in the veins along the thin wadding of it rise and fall, up and down, all over, wet green to belt head, every time you found yourself hard and alone. If only to remind you that you are not. Yes. And no. To remind you that you've never really been. I've been here this whole time, and now you know that it was me, that I made you. Which means that I made all of your bitty parts too. All of the parts you've ever picked at, or rubbed at, or tried to cover up. Your eyes, their lids. The flake you chewed off the nip that fed you, I made that too.
The speaker of the poem, Lord Shiva, goes on like this, inventorying a list for his non-listeners of ways that he has spent entirety not listening to them, the humans, the animals, and the other animate or inanimate creatures that populate his world or universe, all of the things that he's made. I think the speaker states the purpose of the poem quite simply at some point when he says that that he's a body that has nothing to covet and who aims to appear before you, quote, like a king and like an animal, tear the skin off your face with his big blue hands and guzzle you down. one of the questions or driving questions I think the poem asks is, what are the ways of speaking when you know that you will never be heard? And as this is a sort of God who has sort of made it a point to not listen or to engage in an act of not looking at what he's made, is a sort of tension here, where he's actually making you listen to everything that he's done to you or could do to you. So it's just this sort of, I think that the kind of like callousness or the anger that the God character feels, to me produces a kind of generative vulnerability. I think a weak God is someone you can actually kind of work with. And so it was a building that character type was sort of this one of the constraints that the poem has. Today, I'm zooming in from my uncle's house in Chino Hills, California, where Idols of Gods, which I grew up coming to this house, and Idols of Gods took the form of plastic tchotchkes and large wooden facades, marble statues, and shoeless zones of the house that were designated as holy. I grew up watching recreations of Hindu deities in large-scale productions of mythic texts like the Ramayana, and I borrowed some of the images here. For instance, this is Lord Shiva in the Ramayana, tapping his foot to a song that's playing in the background, which becomes a sort of scene in the poem. As I mentioned earlier, the kind of the need to identify with the God was made quite literal with the naming of all of the children after gods, and then the dressing them up, and then the kind of parading them around. So I was kind of interested in this kind of the pageantry of religion or diasporic religious practices as I sort of lived them. But, you know, without a particular kind of understanding of what was necessarily happening. One of my earliest memories of reading a book of poems was at this house when I was younger. There was a couch where there's now a sunroom, and I sat on it with the book I had checked out from the library. I remember the book having a pretty generic name, something like 1,000 Poems, and then it had a dark green hardback cover. I remember family squabbles in the room adjacent to the one that I sat in. In my memory, there was a wall where now there's just a threshold. And I remember spending all afternoon with the book, scanning the lines, most likely pentameter, for a spare chunk of time before dropping my sight to the next line, and to the next line, and to the next one, and so on. Turning the page after every appropriate moment of time had passed to convince any onlooker that the page I was looking at had been read, even if it hadn't. I don't think at this point I was literate, at least not in my memory. Every Friday night growing up in this house and in other homes, we held what are called bhajans. It's like a chanting session that would happen between 8:30 and 9:30 every Friday evening. And it would be everyone in the family would have eaten dinner. We would have divided the room into two parts, one for men to sit in and one for women to sit in, kind of in the same sort of anatomical, you can map it onto Shiva's body pretty well. And we would sing we would sing devotional songs in unison that were led by an individual and then were repeated by the room. And my uncle would play the tabla, my dad would play the harmonium, I was meant to sing. And if I wasn't singing, I was looked at by my mother or my grandmother. If I wasn't clapping, I was tapped on the shoulder and meant to clap. So it was this kind of full performance of prayer, where I became very aware very quickly that I could fake it and get away with it. And so it was really one of this first scenes. Prayer was really one of the first scenes of performing something for someone else, in the sense of devoting one or being like a subject to someone else. And, you know, that to me, that kind of performance had something to do with also assimilating, seeming American, seeming sort of invisible, or with like one of the crowd. And so that's also a sort of scene that kind of appears in this poem. And in the poem, I try to engage it in the form of the bhajan itself. Whether or not I succeed, I am not sure, but I'm just going to play a tiny bit more.
Not at all. I have not until now, listened to any other thing than the throwing slap of my faithful little beasts onto and across the parts of my big blue pod, into and out of my ears, in and out of my mouth. Nothing else has come through. None of the little peeps you make as you slither along, shuttling uselessly between guilt or logic, doling out good acts for bad, bad acts for good, finding any one thing that's in front of you to latch onto. Any little morsel to feed on, any little scrap onto which you impress your sickness of want. That shallow grave of darkness made on the sheath by the sword, or the button that, only ever meant to slip out of its hole to expose not the flesh but the hair, slips out to expose both, or that swatch of hair itself, whatever it is that you find it, resting above the ankle or pressed against the eyelid, or resting finally loose and disheveled upon the shoulder, or their gulf made between them.
Excuse me, that was earlier part where it is still engaging in description.
That sea of blue that runs.
Okay.
Thank you, oh my lord, thank you. My wives, and Shiva is going to destroy me in all of the tiny fire I can make. You repeat it over and over. Shiva made me, and Shiva will waste my gardens and my wives, and Shiva is going to destroy me in all of the tiny fire I can make. Shiva made me, and Shiva will waste my gardens and my wives, and Shiva is going to destroy me in all of the tiny fire that I can make. Shiva made me, and Shiva will waste my gardens and my wives, and Shiva is going to destroy me in all of the tiny fire I can make. Shiva made me, and Shiva will waste my gardens and my wives, and Shiva is going to destroy me in all of the tiny fire I can make. Shiva made me, and Shiva will waste my gardens and my wives, and Shiva is going to destroy me in all of the tiny fire I can make. Shiva made me, and Shiva will waste my gardens and my wives, and Shiva is going to destroy me in all of the tiny fire I can make. Shiva made me, and Shiva will waste my gardens and my wives, and Shiva is going to destroy me in all of the tiny fire I can make. You repeat my name over and over. Shiva, 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 Shiva. You sing my fucking name. You fucking sing it. You sing it over and over. You sing to me. It's you. It's all you. You give me so much joy. You sing to me. Thank you, oh my lord. Thank you. You've given me everything. You sing to me. If it weren't for you, you sing. Look at you dance, and look at your whole body shine. You sing. It's you. It's you who clears my head. And then you sing. You're the one who attracts, and then you sing. You're the one that destroys, and you sing, and you tell me, and you sing. I surrender. Yes, I do. It's all for you. It's always been you, and I am nothing. You sing. We're all equal in your eyes. You sing to me. You call me beautiful. You call me awful. You say, it's me. That I am the one to save you from bondage. That I am the one to make you pure. You sing louder and louder, and then you get your kids to sing.
The poet Tan Lin writes that a novel shouldn't be about passions, that it should be a release from emotions that are distracting us from feeling the things that we are waiting to feel. In this way, he says, the novel is already inside us, like an awareness of the future that is already over. Lynn refers to the novel a few pages later as a non-musical interlude, which I interpret to mean that for Lynn to be novelistic is to have the capacity to recede or to become in a way receptive to one's surroundings, the novel that disappears. This receding or perhaps mode of receptivity, I think of as akin to listening to devotional music, or as akin to not reading while holding a book, so as to eavesdrop on rumors about uncles and aunts, for instance, or events like a birth or a death. Events, Tenlin writes, should disappear like anecdotes into a novel without ever becoming events. Only by so doing can the novel remove the various forms of the generic and the stupid from the world and then give them back. I drove down to Chino Hills last Sunday, and we sat in pandemic era traffic, which is stronger than ever somehow. While driving at a sluggish pace, we passed by a large temple that had been erected in 2008, around the same time I was graduating college and was living around here. I would come to my uncle's home, this place, to eat and do my laundry, and occasionally would have to visit the temple with my family. It's a temple run by the Bas Chavansi Akshar Purushottam Swaminarayan Sanstha, a Hindu sect named BAPS that has close ties to India's ruling party and has built temples around the world. And as of last week, the FBI broke the story, or the FBI was approached by a set of lawyers that were interrogating BAPS, as the temple had possibly exploited hundreds of low caste men in the years-long construction project that led to its building. The temple that they built in Robbinsville, New Jersey, one of the largest temples built by BAPS, had workers living in trailers that were hidden from view. They worked 14-hour days and had time off, but were forced to live in tight living conditions and made no more than $1 per hour. According to the lawsuit, a wage claim filed in the US District Court in New Jersey, the majority are Dalit, the lowest rung in India's class system. It essentially was the largest human trafficking ring that was found in American history, I imagine, since slavery proper, if that can be a distinction, as this is just another form of it. The organization pledged the equivalent of about $300,000 to Mr. Modi, or President Modi's, Prime Minister Modi's most important election promise to build a temple in the city of Ayodhya, where a mosque had stood before Hindu devotees destroyed it in 1992, which led to one of the first iterations of ethnic cleansing in the state of Gujarat. The destruction of Babri Mosque set off waves of sectarian violence, and the construction of the temple in Ayodhya, which was just sort of inaugurated this year, is a significant step in the quest by Modi and his party to shift India from its secular foundations toward a Hindu identity. I wanted to close this lecture just by highlighting a few individuals' works who I have discovered since writing The Unlovable and have found it useful to think about as I continue writing and having to deal with work that I've already written, i.e. things I've made as a good listener. The first is how am I doing on time? Is there any way to find out? The first is Miralani Mukherjee, and this is one of her sculptures that was displayed at the Met Breuer. She was an artist who was born in 1945, and she worked with fiber, casts, hemp, and later bronze to produce massive, large-scale constructions of really erotically charged Hindu deities. And this is a scene from the Ramayana, which I watched as a kid, sort of next to one of her full frontal tableaus. But I find the kind of relationship very interesting, and looking at her kind of the animism in the work made me realize that so much of the kind of television I was watching as well was this tableau vivant, this kind of reanimation of images or icons that had already been seen. So this kind of arrangement is something that's just being represented over and over. I wanted to present the work of Ajay Kurian, who is also thinking about Miralani Mukherjee's work. And these are sort of large scale, also full frontal, idol-like shapes that are, in my opinion, thinking about sort of future worlds and future kind of iterations of reproduction. But what I am enjoying about them is that they're completely non-human, and they're sort of folding themselves into a kind of animal mythology or animalist mythology that I think colonial India kind of, or the colonization basically just like washed out of a specific kind of culture. And the final is an artist that I'm somewhat obsessed with lately. His name is Jangar Singh Sharma, and he was an indigenous tribal artist who was born in the 1960s. And let me pull up my notes here. Jangar Singh Sharma, who's started a sort of school of his own called the Jangar Kalam, was a Gandh Bhatkarn artist from Madhya Pradesh, which is a north, I believe, eastern state. And he was one of the first people to take oral traditions from two different vernacular traditions and attempt to give visual form to them in his large-scale paintings and murals. These two are works on paper with acrylic, and they're the first time that this sort of indigenous stories from various places in the country were able to be seen or given kind of like physical form. And I find that sort of translation interesting, especially as I'm trying to kind of reverse it in some sort of fashion and make it not imagistic. What I like as a non-immigrant, I was born and raised in the United States. What I like about this work is that it aims to figure out how we can still create a kind of visual or imagistic or religious idiom or felicity of form out of things that have subjected us. And I think Jangar's practice of reintroducing these animalistic characters in these very non-human ways sort of departs from the tradition that we see in a more popular artist like Miralani Mukherjee's work, where the kind of anthropomorphic individuals stand in more than the animals come in. I'm sorry, it's very hard for me to see. I can't see anybody, so I feel like I'm in a bit of a vacuum. But I think that's it for my talk. I don't think I have anything else. But I think I may have gone over time as well, so I'm not sure if I should.
Thank you so much, Shiv. You didn't go over time.
Oh,
No,
okay.
Yes.
That's perfect.
That was such an amazing collage of images, insights, and readings. So thank you. The recordings in particular were so beautiful. Thank you so much. And are you gonna read now or?
I can, if you'd like. What?
However you prefer. If you want to take
Yeah.
a break now and then read at the end.
Yes, we can listen
Whatever
to
you prefer.
Nisha and Christine, and you can.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
after,
That would be
or
nice.
you
A break would be
watch.
great.
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're gonna listen now to Nisha. Whenever you are ready.
Okay.
Thank
Hi. Thanks so much. Thanks to the organizers and everyone who's here. And thanks so much, Shiv. I was like making loads of notes, and there are just so many overlaps and convergences, I think, between our like different projects that it's really exciting to hear. What I was thinking of reading today, which I hope will follow on from Shiv's amazing presentation, is a long poem from my book States of the Body Produced by Love, called Future as Flowers. So partly because I think it speaks to the gear with petals kind of schema, because the poem is sort of structured around a yantra, which is sort of like a mandala. It's a geometric representation of a deity, and it's a diagram through which you kind of go through the different layers of the diagram to get to the center, at which point everything explodes and you reach God consciousness if you do it right. So I wanted to share that poem, but I also just wanted to maybe just really briefly speak back to a couple of things that Shiv said that I just wanted to, which I feel like I hope are concerns in the poem that I'm going to share. Beginning maybe with origins and actually, rather than thinking about cultural, historical, spiritual contexts and backgrounds, not as origins necessarily, but as starting places for thought and exploration and critique, potentially. Thinking about, for myself in my book, the process of trying to return to understand something about my background, which started with love and actually became contaminated with the violence of the histories that I just necessarily had to work through, including caste-based violences, the violences of Hindu right-wing nationalism, anti-Muslim sentiments, anti-Indigenous, well, not just sentiments, violences. So this kind of like love always being inseparable from violence. And finally, just also about the fascination with Shiv Shakti, because that was very much something that I started with, particularly that avatar that you shared with us, and thinking about how it's often the queerness of Hindu deities is it's both explicit visually and it's sort of not properly addressed, but there is this idea that strangeness constitutes divinity, which was something that I found completely thrilling. My focus was on these not that well-known tantric goddesses, and I was drawn to them because of how weird they were. So, for example, the goddess who's the sort of on the cover of my book and who's the sort of presiding deity of my book, Chinnamasta, it's she who cuts off her head to feed her loved ones. So the blood in her iconography, the blood fountains out of her neck straight into the mouths, the open mouths of her children. And so, yeah, that sort of strangeness that is actually what makes her so powerful and so divine was, yeah, something that sort of impelled my work and, I guess, devotion. So anyway, sorry, I hope that wasn't too long an intro. Futures flowers. You want to imagine futures. You want to create futures objects in your mind and to hold them there until your mind turns into the shapes of these objects. The practice of imagining turns into the rightness of action according to the metaphysics of the ritual, so that flowers formed by the hands become the fruits of the practice, become abolition's efflorescence. The ritual must be repeated until it turns on itself, its objects destroying their causality. You turn on yourself, move into the void in yourself, and begin. The red door to the temple is guarded by two elephants, both vomiting rainbows. Their vomit meets in the sky above them and fuses to form a lunette. The lunette is decorated with brides-to-be standing a corpse width apart. One is to be enjoyed, one worshipped only. The brides are protected by lions, who are nothing like the real police sitting across the street from the real temple. They protect and enforce the reality that requires them. You do not require them. You prefer these lions who prop open their mouths with the heads of your enemies. You decide to substitute yourself for your enemies, abolishing liberalism by means of liberalism, placing your head in the lion's mouth. Lying between the brides, you realize that your body is corpse width. Yours is the corpse by which you must enter. Past the first hurdle, you throw colored powders at the space where the door should be, trying to make it appear in your mind. It's a jeweled throne on an island of butter in the ocean of milk. It's a forest of the lotus of the heart that abides in the citadel. It's a red door to a temple in the cremation ground inside your body. Mind guards the door to consciousness. The colored powders fall into a geometric pattern on the ground of being and non-being. You lie down and puff your way in. It's easy. You make it all the way, breaking through 3 straight lines, discontinuing tenses. Blow time out of mind, let futures flowers. Another line appears, a dark line formed by a cloud's shadow. The cloud rearranges itself in the sky. It's an elephant. It's your mind stuck in mind. The dark lines mark its time of death. The elephant bursts into hundreds of thousands of silvery spheres. You stand in the shadows looking up, mouth wide open in awe of futurity. You swallow spheres, internalize obstacles that you may pass them through your body, pass memories of elephants, pass clouds. The line increases and covers ground. It's the side of a circle, accounting for error. The circumference is planted with golden arms reaching upwards, stretching to hold each other's hands at the apex. You know There are no multicolored hands across the world. There are oceans of wine surrounding mountains of flesh. Nevertheless, you visualize a circle of arms raising a cone of power, vitriol crystallizing into bluestone. True solidarity is a beautiful and charmingly corrosive process. What if the future is faceless? Return to the shadows. You project your shadows onto the clouds, casting your self-esteem, all those little mothers, into outer space. Mind rays alight. Little mothers carry lamps out of your body and up to the stars. Infatuated with darkness, you resist their advice. Luminosity is the state of things that are luminous and also of things that are dark. You want to be left alone with your mind rays, a cosmic puppet dangling in the grandeur of the inner void, your desirelessness. But you are surrounded by kissy noises resonating concentrically. Everyone and everything is kissing except you. Your mouth is stuffed full of flowers, and even these flowers are kissing each other inside your mouth, as if you were simply a space in which desire takes place. You struggle to imagine kissing from the perspective of your mouth. Your tongue is a brazen plate struck by lightning and struck and struck. You know that subtle sounds are better, unstruck sounds are best, and bite down on your tongue. You bite off the head of your enemy and join in with anticipation. The cracks in the walls of the temple are stuffed with little yellow chrysanthemums. You remove these flowers and destabilize the temple in your race to one-pointed consciousness, which is the brain-facing lotus at the crown of your skull. The crown hides a hole into which sky drips, feeding the 1,000-petaled lotus that blooms behind and occasionally into and out of your eyes, your ears, your mouth. Feel the petals tickle your mind when you shake your head out of time. Feel the roots of the lotus penetrate the wet soil of sky and spread into the infinite wetness of space. No, not yet. The temple stands. You must grasp the triangles, for one who is not a triangle must not worship triangles. The lines and angles suggest hundreds of thousands of awkward bodies, golden arms, sword fighting, sunbeams, laser quests, illuminated parts. But you strive for unbroken light, sectionless consciousness, sparkling waves of bliss. The triangles exist in another dimension. They cast shadows in the shapes of cubes and the shapes of spheres. Cast these shadows upon your body, cover your body in perfect solids. How absurd, the masters say, to spread perfection on your body like jam on bread. But you delight in hyperreality, this calculated immersion in pleasure. You pass yourself through your body without breaking your body. You make your shadows dance. Your shadows hold hands, rub beaks, play footsie, wind tails together, totter rosily cheek to cheek, bumpity bump, bump, bump. They circle each other, full body bobbing. They take each other by surprise, stand to attention and stargaze. The absolute soul of the universe is an assemblage of migratory birds whose agitation is indeed creation. You understand that when they say they dream to change the world, what they really mean is that they sleep badly. You say something about sleeping badly, the death of death whose destruction is liberation. You say nothing about the seeds in your heart, the roots creeping into your circulatory system, the seedlings poking out of your center of consciousness. In truth, your desires are infinite, your actions infinitesimal. You are as close as you can get to the center before sneezing. The temple inside you implodes in a mess of cremation ash, yellow pollen, third eye twinkle, and sonic dot. You are as far away as you can get from the world without renouncing it. Opposing yourself, you do all this as an offering to me, these flowers formed by the hands, this worship through the flesh, these lightning flashes of social life, this rhythm through rightness and opposition. You turn out of these objects, turning out. That's the poem. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nisha.
Thank you so much.
Christine, do you want to follow?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here. It was really a pleasure to listen to Shiv and Nisha. I think there's some construction that just started there in the background. I'm really sorry if that makes it hard to hear. I'll try to speak up. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here, so thank you, everybody. These are some new poems that I wrote. I'm just going to start reading them. Good night, sweet thing. We dreamt of flowers and listening to women. Still, every time we go to bed, we go to war. Sleep drowns in the arms of a fallen angel. Maybe she's been nauseous since January, like me. I forget. Tomorrow we can wake up without pain. And if I could sing you to sleep, I would. Last night I felt afraid to die. Remember to turn off the lights wherever you don't want to see. Remember, I am a feather in love, and this world is a thief. How sick must it make us? Mop me up and send me the bill. In another life, I find my fantasy, where the void respects me forever. What hope is there if feathers can no longer fall to the ground with grace? Self-reflection figure. I fold myself in search of my own thoughts and feelings, each a mirage, like an army, all lined up in a row. Soldiers, please stay still as I track my apparition. Wait for me. My command, a fleeting hunger in disguise, lingers stale nowhere. I organize my delusions and wonder if I'm haunting myself. I pause to include two hugging figures into my recollection. I move through life like symbols in a painting, but what do I signify? God is the space between you and me. Don't obsess over my deathless, rosy cheeks when you can't see them, your biggest fear. They are 100% guaranteed, tried and true, even when existence is a dark and godless hole. People dream about you, though I don't know how often. More mysterious unknowns. Be still. An owl's flight is silent sometimes, like, I love you in broad daylight and I love you behind your back. Have trust, have faith, not in God, but in love with me. Society's poem. I wish I could know what it felt like to truly be carefree. The trouble is, there are so many consequences. The nightmares also that you made me, and all my thoughts are yours. And I feel so for being anything at all, whatever I want, without you in my spine. But there are many consequences. Yes, there are many consequences. Extinction level event. Ask your parents. Is God real? I painted a skull on my face using Pat McGrath's Sublime Skin Highlighting Trio. It was a divine coincidence. My living quarters and existence were that of a poverty-stricken gorilla caged at a zoo. The same beggary held my teeth at night. A meteorite could hit me. I'd drink tea and my grin would turn to glass. Then finally I'd shatter across the globe. Why run from disappointment when you can throw yourself to the tsunami? Die in my arms. If I were to lean in close and whisper in his ear, I'd say, you forget. You don't have to lie anymore, because you're an adult. Oh, to give myself to a black hole. Evil won't ever forget you once you welcome it into your home. It blushes in the dark. I disavow my most unwanted part of self. I, danger. I'm really excited to show you who I am deep down inside. My language faints. Maybe you can catch it, who knows? It's foreign to you, yet you feel it in the gravity that causes a single tear to fall and trickle down your tender, bitter cheek. It's precious to behold. When I dream, I have power and stray from evil's poison. Deep behind my eyes, two blissful black holes. You look at me as countless worlds arise. Suddenly, I am responsible for them all. But in a good dream, I don't have to care, so good night. In sleep, I can at least hire someone else to be alone for me, to be awake, to swim in the waters of everyone else's pain. In our eyes, many dimensions of time and space recline, an odalisque and confident attraction to what is truly yours. The language God gave you, to always speak in true love, an emissary to receive another's universe into your arms. Oh, how I beg when I find an instant I cannot keep. Say it is so forever. God, please do not betray me once again. But those unrelenting anxieties of wasted time and trust in one society, something pure and colonial, annexed part of my soul, like an analog radio dial stuck between two stations. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
Shiv, do you want to continue?
Sure.
Thank you again.
Do we have like a time frame for this?
So we can do like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like around 10 minutes is
Okay.
good?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine and Nisha, for those readings. I wrote down so many of the lines, and I have more to think about. This has just been such a wonderfully rich program. So I'm really happy to be a part of it. I'm going to read from part 2 of my book, which is called Obedience Residency Manual. And I'm going to read a short story called Discarnate Nude. That begins kind of weirdly, but then sort of falls into place. Say you encounter at some point a feeling, probably momentary, that leads you to believe that reaching out to say I love you is the most appropriate thing for you to do. Perhaps you think you'll make a brand new kind of pleasure possible for the receiver to have, or will at least reduce whatever X vulnerability they might be feeling. But you're wrong. The fact is, the ways you've deemed appropriate to reach out in the first place, hi, or hey, how are you? I just wanted to check in and see how you were. It's been a while. I'm really glad we can talk. Or, hey, baby, I love you, fulfill no actual purpose other than to calm you down, providing for you, not them, momentary relief that is equitable and kind to the effects of taking a fourth of Xanax with food or hitting a bowl 2 to 3 times alone, followed by a hot shower, or jerking off once or twice. Or jerking off 100 times to the same scene until the video itself begins to shudder, its contents suddenly rendered unfamiliar and disfigured inside of the screen you have propped up on your chest like an iron curtain between your face where your eyes are and your legs where your dick is. Until all of the scenes, whatever details that have the last 99 times at least successfully made the bodies in it's impressively specific to you, a little special even, maybe because of the lighting, or maybe because you think of the occasional flickering of various unexpected traces of the bodies that the lighting, despite the loose narrative, increases your chance of seeing, the irregular hair pattern, the flecks of eczema, the dirty fingernails, the mildly inflamed warts, the small map of ass pimples, the particularly chapped lip, all start to become discarnate, each detail receding enough from focus so that for a moment, other things can be seen. The rather generic postures the people in this scene were specifically instructed to take, for instance, or the awkward angle they decided to shoot the scene from, or the two maybe more soft but muscular and ageless bodies with predictable tufts of hair in all the right places and the thin film of sweat coating each of them uniformly, flattening out those once attractive details in favor of a head-to-toe glisten. Due, you think, dick-handed, to a very effective placement of lights. Yes, you moan suddenly. A single high-key light, a fill, and 1, maybe 2 hard-back lights so as to focus the jerker-offer's attention to the asses, sacks, and faces of the men while remaining mobile so that over the duration of the film, the whatever jerker-offer is guided to draw his focus into the image, on the actors, deflecting his attention away from the rather nondescript set the two agents, in this case, have chosen to fuck inside of. But not this time. This time you've stumbled beyond that facade and you say to yourself aloud again, yes, that's definitely a well-placed keynote light set up by a crew of other unphotographed but likely very sweaty men in the upper left corner of the room the scene is shot in. In a room that could be in a tool shed on a ranch somewhere, possibly even the one on Jake Crew's ranch, a farm-free catalyst ranch periodically rented out for film shoots, which must also be used based on what can be seen here as some kind of props room, especially as you notice in the right-hand corner of the frame near the couch, the pair of shorts Jason removed in the final outdoor scene of picking up trash, and on the other side of the frame, the left on the floor, the pipe put in and never removed from AJ's ass and bareback rednecks, and in the center of the frame on the table, the pair of wine glasses that appear as the main transitional object in Panic Love, the switch, which launches the 40-minute or so fantasy sequence in which the young whatever sleeping lover successfully seduces his new stepfather moments after the young lover's mother leaves the room, in this film, a kitchen. But not before the stepfather pours out 2 glasses of wine while telling his young stepson, in an act of observed and appreciated bonding, a story about when he, the stepfather, was himself a boy and hitchhiked all by himself catching trout and rides across the wilds of Montana. The wine glasses, of course, are never sipped for the duration of the fantasy, but are returned to later in a close-up shot in order to bookend the scene. This gives the introductory scene closure before the following, which begins with the slow fade of a shot to a shot of the young lover's smooth, unconscious face, before the camera zooms out to reveal his body stretching across and over a twin-sized cot, to the left of which the reveal continues. The rugged stepfather is kneeling on the floor, reaching out to blow the young waking body. You pause, grunt, continue. In front of you is a whole room full of objects suggestively rearranged in a previously unused location, a tool shed, which now you've jerked off to 100 times. Wow. Extraordinary. And it doesn't even you level the image shuddering between you and your dick, have that weird, annoying yellow light at the edge of the frame that many other scenes you've jerked off to 100 times have. No intrusive flare of sunlight creeps into the frame, making the as of yet unpaid pair of bodies seem frightened or caught. It looks like there was a very generous budget here, as the varying indoor-outdoor color schemes and temperatures are regulated by the premeditated purchase of standard shooting lights, which the professional lighting crew took some care to arrange. First by matching each of the color lights, and then probably, without even taking a break, white balancing the room, making the tool shed look, you think, as it was probably intended to, like a break room where mechanics go to cool off. The lighting is probably about 90% of what the film crew has to pay attention to when they're setting up. Or maybe not. Maybe after making sure that the lighting matches the bodies, they have to make sure that the ambient sound is okay, or that it's not too cold. There are many things a crew has to do before they shoot and to modify until the deed is done. Fascinating, you think, that Ace and Jacob probably had to maintain for the whole day, maybe even two, the elements of their chemistry that really make their attraction for each other seem totally believable and rich to others. Skeptics of love like yourself. Crucial make it or break it moments in the sequence, even if it will all be rearranged in post anyway. Pauses punctuate the cast and the crew's day while two men who are fucking say nothing to each other, men who aren't fucking speak. As when the director, who cares for his craft, who's really worked at it, turns to his lighting guy for assistance. Or when Stan and Joe are suddenly needed, as Hank is busy adjusting a bounce. We're definitely going to need something for the fucking contrast in here, Hank says, adjusting things. Look at that. See, a little more on Cinnabons over there. See what I mean? I mean, he's flopping around. I don't even know what to do. In the light, it's not even getting close. It's not even hitting the right. Do you see that? Hank, Stan, Joe, and the rest of the sweaty crew take turns speaking to each other, fidgeting around Ace and Jacob, who are working their asses off on a long 2-day shoot to successfully display one another, who are working their asses off on a long 2-day shoot to successfully display the men taking turns penetrating one another. Sometimes Joe checks in. How you doing, Ace? We're going to need you to keep it in there like that for a few more minutes. Try getting up on your tiptoes. That's good. And like before, just keep your fist on the small part of his back. And Ace checks in with Jacob. Is that okay? Yes, Dad, I'm fine, actually. Certain angles you imagine must have been especially difficult to light due to the fact that one of the guys is white and the other guy is brown, a difference in skin surface that the lighting crew had to prepare for. They must have had to make some other kind of sacrifice to light the scene of brown Ace plowing white Jacob at this angle so beautifully, like cutting the actors' salaries so as to have enough money to pay for Mark, the more wizened lighting assistant, to be there. Oh God, now look at him. Look at his ass. That literally looks like the moon, Mark. It really looks like he's mooning me, said the director. I don't need to see that. Joe complains, kneeling down to look at the scene from another angle. You know what? And he's actually got a great ask. This looks like shit. Mark, you got that ultra fire, right? The assistant, Mark, unzips his backpack and pulls out the Ultrafire Mini XPE Q5 he had picked up earlier. He nervously crabs beneath the couple with his Ultrafire, a massive, bright key light strapped to a pole. He remembers being a film student who never knew how to light anything. He tries not to get insecure about it, reminding himself that he's rich and good at talking and that he's needed there on set, and that his Ultrafire will ultimately please the director Joe, and as it will address the actors' white and brown surfaces uniquely. Ace holds still inside Jacob, while Mark shoves the bulb into the curve of Ace's ass. Fuck! I'm sorry, man. Don't worry. From where we're shooting this scene, no one's even gonna see that. You're fucking burning my ass, man. This is gonna look great. They shoot some more. Fuck, that fucking hurts. I'm losing it. At this point, Jacob, the dissociating white bottom, paler than ever, chimes in. What the hell? I don't know what the fuck's going on, babe. This fucker just keeps pushing that light into my ass. We're good. Let's go. I'm just tired. Fuck, I'm sorry, I did it again, said Mike. Dude, come on. The crew pauses the otherwise smooth shooting to medicate Ace's burns. They decide to shoot the entire scene from the other side of the room so as to avoid getting his brown, blotchy burn on cam. As they move everything over, they realize they didn't need such a complicated setup in the first place. They let their lighting assistant go and continue. The AD takes charge and makes the crew run fast as they've only rented the ranch for 2 days. He forces them all, Joe, the director, and Hank and Stan and Ace and Jacob, to skip their lunch hour so that they can make it to their later than expected deadline. You finally come and slam your laptop shut. A few minutes pass. You check your text and a momentary feeling appears. Over the next couple minutes, you review your options. Get up and go for a walk, write a letter to a friend, get out of your chair, or make any other act seem better to you for now than saying I love you to this whatever person. Any old thing, like prying open a shut screen, pulling up a rapidly shifting set of images and staring at them until you render yourself entirely still for long enough to know that for now, as before, your feelings can be kept to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shiv.
Thanks a lot, Shiv.
We just want to say a big thank you to all three, Nisha, Christine, and Shiv, for this gathering of readings. And we feel so honored to have had you here today with us. So we're so happy to be able to end here with Petals like this. After the readings and conversations we shared in the last few months, the readings and the talk resonate so much with all of that, and we feel like we now have new directions to take in thinking and to keep reading, and we're very, very grateful for that. So thanks again to the three. And Carol, I don't know if there are any comments or questions in the chat. Otherwise, we
were just having people saying thank you and hi, and that it was really good. So just also translating to you guys that it's been great, and yeah, thank you so much. There's nothing but good words.
Thanks a lot.
thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you all. It was really lovely.
See you tomorrow at the same time.
Yes.
Tomorrow we can continue with Shay and Beckett. If you
Cool.
want to join us. So see you tomorrow.
Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.